I had some points written down, mostly technical, but I think from Atif Mia's presentation and from what has been said here, rightly so, the question of food security is a political problem. It is not an economic problem. There are two aspects to food security: availability and affordability. Both are politically determined. Since we have the Deputy Ambassador of the Netherlands here, correct me if I'm wrong, but my reading of European history, in the last 100 years especially, is that Europe also suffered problems of inequality and poverty and lack of housing, but it was the emergence of the Soviet Union which changed that. Fear of communism induced change. It is 1917 when the Soviet Union was formed, and 1920 the ILO was formed, International Labour Organization. Suddenly labor had to be appeased. Something had to be done about labor if the rest of Europe wasn't going to go communist. Whatever the reason, it has been good for the people of Europe. And you have a welfare state, you have high standards, you have the rule of law. I've had chance to go to Holland, and a number of houses that I went, I found that the washroom was under the staircase. So you could only stand in one part of the washroom to take a shower. You couldn't go to the other part because it was too low. And I always asked, why is this so? And I was told that maybe 100 or 150 years ago, having washrooms in the house was not the norm. So something happened politically to change that. That has not happened in Pakistan. The state, and I'm not referring to governments, the state represents the elite and it serves the elite. It is not there to serve the people. Issues of food insecurity may concern us here, may concern the Asma Jahangir Foundation to have a session. It does not concern the government. And I've had bits and pieces of occasion being in and out of government, so I know. In 2008, the government of Sindh initiated a project. 2 billion rupees were allocated to give milk and biscuit packets to children in schools, government schools. And they asked World Food Program to execute that. 2009, I happened to be in World Food Program. So 2008, I was in the federal government. I had the occasion to design Benazir Income Support Program. Then 2009, I was in WFP. And 2010, I was advisor for planning and development in Sindh. So that project came on my table for execution. And I asked questions from the secretary, relevant secretary, how is this going to be distributed? How will biscuits and milk reach the schools? There were 49,400 government schools spread all over Sindh. 85% were one-room schools. Will this be sent every day? It's not possible. And if you are going to send it weekly or monthly, it will spoil. The milk will spoil. At 40 degrees temperature, the rats will eat the biscuits away. They had no idea. They hadn't thought through that. There was no answer. And I cancelled that project. It came in the newspapers that I have deprived children of biscuits and milk, but I saved 2 billion rupees of government money because they wouldn't have got it anyway. But this is an example that the state wasn't really bothered. 2 billion rupees for milk and biscuits to children made good headlines, and they were going to go ahead with it. I can go on a lot. You mentioned hunger. Pakistan is not that short of food. Our wheat deficit is about 2 to 3 million. We don't produce any dal or hardly any, and we import, and we don't have foreign exchange. So I think what I would say is the first responsibility of the government, of the state, is to provide food. It is the responsibility of the state. It is not the responsibility of the market. I think this is something that has to be understood. We must designate areas and acreage for wheat and dal and other essential commodities. We must not depend on import for these things because the international market is very volatile. Prices go up and down. It feeds inflation as it is doing now. If we were self-sufficient in wheat, we wouldn't have to face the effects of the war in Ukraine. So I think the basic problem is that the state has to be pro-people. State has to function for the people, which it is not. A lot of our acreage is devoted to sugar cane, which is not needed at all, and which only feeds certain political families. And sugar cane gets subsidy from the state in public money at two levels. First, we subsidize the farmers, and then we subsidize the sugar mills out of public money. And this public money is given to them, and we create a budget deficit, which then creates its own series of problems. You mentioned children are fainting in school. I've come across children who come to school and can't concentrate because they haven't had breakfast. They haven't had breakfast because their parents can't afford to give them breakfast. They just wake them up and rush them to school. How do you expect them to concentrate and learn? And government policy, lastly, I want to say, does affect availability. Affordability is a function of poverty and inequality and so on and so forth. The government has not cared about creating jobs. In fact, government policies have consistently killed jobs in this country. We have created a casino economy where wealth is created in the stock market and the property market through speculation. Factories are closing down, jobs are disappearing, and exports are disappearing. In November, we have to open the LC for import of wheat because our own wheat runs out somewhere in January. Then we are dependent on imported wheat. There was a time when in the 90s, we had a 3-month caretaker government, and the advisor was imported from abroad, Pakistani, but came from abroad. His interest was to make sure that his record is good when he leaves after 3 months. He wanted to make sure that the foreign exchange reserves is more at the time of his departure than what it was at the time he took over. He did not open the LC in November. As a result of which, if you open the LC, letter of credit means that you place the import order, the ships arrive in January with wheat, and then it begins to get into the system. Because it was not opened in November, there was no ship arriving in January, and we had massive riots all across the country because there was no wheat. So availability is not just a macro variable that, okay, the country needs 30 million tons of wheat and we have 30 millions of wheat, but you can create shortages by these short-term problems. Then in a later government, I think about 10-15 years ago, data was manipulated to show that we have a wheat surplus, and the government exported wheat. And it turned out, no, it's not a surplus, it's a deficit, and we had to import wheat. So availability can be, we can have all the wheat available, we can have silos and warehouses full of wheat. That doesn't mean it is reaching everywhere, and Balochistan is one area where wheat does not reach. I have come across areas in Balochistan, there was just no wheat available anywhere. And there was one local flour mill, वो क्या कहते हैं हम, चक्की, you know, yeah, where there was wheat bags and there was cactus. And I asked them, what is cactus doing here? He said, we don't have enough wheat. People cannot afford wheat at this price, so we mix it with cactus powder so that the price can come down and people can afford it. I think these are some very down-to-earth issues of food security. When we look at big numbers and concepts, and these get hidden out and don't get exposed. So I think people suffer when you don't pay particular attention to their needs, and they will never get attention unless and until the state is organized to address the people's needs and their needs, and not the needs of the elite. They don't, as it is in Pakistan now. The problems we face is not because of poverty. Pakistan is a rich country, resource-rich country in every respect. It is just the inequality and the maldistribution of resources, and those who make policy are insensitive to the people's needs. Thank you.